World Federation of Investors Annual Meeting in Vienna, Austria. Investor Conference on Financial Education and Business Activities in Central and Eastern Europe and Russia. Problem of expropriation of share owners and bondholders of the Slovenian banks. Tour of Austrian Post AG Distribution Center. World Federation of Investors, the organization that represents 57 national shareholders associations, held its annual meeting in Vienna, Austria.
The World Federation of Investors is a group of both national investor education advocacy organization and individual investor advocates. We have two main purposes. One is provide investor education, so helping national associations better teach investing techniques. And we have an annual meeting in which each year we go through another process of the investor education process. And secondly is the advocacy on the part of individual shareholders, making sure that individual shareholders are being treated fairly by issuers, companies they invest in.
Vienna was always a meeting place. Vienna, we had lots of interesting conferences in the past. 200 years ago, we had the Vienna Congress, and I thought it was just about time to bring all these interesting people to Vienna, because Vienna sees itself as a bridge point.
The meeting was followed by the Investor Conference, discussions about financial education and banking, as well as business activities in Central and Eastern Europe and Russia. The event was held at the premises of the Raiffeisen Bank and featured participants of 57 national associations of investors, various banks and corporations, Austrian Ministry of Finance and Central Bank, Vienna Stock Exchange, and many others.
I believe that sanctions is the last measure of politicians if they don't know what to do. It's hurting EU, Europe more than it is hurting Russia. They touch most and have the most effect is when they're adopted against the financial market, because that is more or less the blood that runs through the economy, and if you curtail the blood flow, then the whole economy is negatively impacted. The short-term impact in the banking industry is relatively low because we have had time to prepare ourselves for the sanctions. However, there will be a broader impact for the entire economy, so for the economy on the whole. Additional capital outflows. We expect this year roughly $100 billion total outflow. We have reached 70 billion already. That's also figures and numbers for Russia. We expect an exchange rate pressure due to increased USD demand, increasing uncertainty of the general direction of the Russian politics.
Eastern Europe is now faster growing than the rest of the European Union. And the European Union has failed to some extent to further develop and expand and help those countries. We have them introduced into the European Union, and then the crisis has come. And we have forgotten about them because there was Greece and Portugal and Cyprus and other crises.
Some guys say that Austrian banks have tried to conquer, starting with 1989, the CEE countries, and I think they did so, but of course it was a friendly takeover or a friendly investment and not an unfriendly one.
Austrian banks expanded by establishing subsidiaries in that region, and from the second half of the 1990s they also acquired interests in local banks as governments sold off their stakes. Central and Eastern Europe is a region that has undergone big changes in recent years and attracted considerable foreign investment. The Austrian economy was quick in recognizing the opportunities that those changes offered to take advantage of the chances and has been able to profit greatly from development in this area. Huge problems and the perils in the strategy of Austrian banks became apparent in 2008 at the start of the worldwide financial crisis. Austrian government has been forced to provide totally 14 billion euro or $19 billion in capital or direct aid to the country's banks. The state aid of participation capital is already redeemed by Raiffeisen and Erste Group, but the crisis didn't disappear. Even the contrary happened. The expansion was based on too big thinking. It was probably too quick and certainly too risky, and not to forget, too expensive.
We believe that financial education supports the smooth functioning of financial markets as it enhances the efficiency of financial markets, as it fosters innovation in financial markets, and actually informed consumers simply make better financial decisions than uninformed consumers. We also think that economic literacy is important to understand, for instance, structural reforms in the economy, and that structural reforms have something to do with labor markets and product markets and actually improve the functioning of these markets.
Despite of all stock exchange discussions where to list, companies have to be prepared and willing to do good investor relations with the markets, to invest money and time also to work with capital markets, to work with investors. If a company wants to list on a second market, then I think there have to be reasons for that. There will not be so much liquidity if there is no business perspective or activities. If you have a closer look to the Slovenian companies listed on the Warsaw Stock Exchange, you will see that the vast majority of liquidity is done in Slovenia on the home market, not at Warsaw Stock Exchange.
Actually, we have invested in Croatia and Slovenia. We have 5 stop shops in Slovenia. And there are formats and products where you can invest in these countries. What we wouldn't invest is a large office building, for instance, or things which in the end have to go to institutional investors, which are typically not located in those countries and which are not inclined to invest in small SEE countries.
We are the European Confederation of Directors Associations, as I said, and our objective is to represent the views of company directors from EU member states to corporate governance policymakers at EU level. Altogether, we represent around 55,000 board members throughout Europe, and we represent members that are board directors in the largest companies and to the smallest companies. Our strategic missions are 4: to promote the role of the directors and develop a professionalism and the European corporate governance standards. We are a lobby organization. As a lobby organization, we want to influence the European decision-making, that is the Commission, the members of Parliament, and the Council, first of all. 3, we want to provide services to our members. Mainly, we are a distribution center of information to our members of what's happening in Brussels, but we also provide and offer education to our members. And 4, we want to promote and facilitate the development of natural directors institutes, for example, here in Austria.
On this occasion in Vienna, the representatives of the World Federation of Investors were otherwise informed about the recent events related to the shocking expropriation of shareholders and bondholders of the Slovenian banks, and about the letter which has recently been sent by VZMD to important international financial institutions. The eminent participants have expressed their concern and surprise over such conduct and over the inaction of the regulators and the competent institutions.
We talked about the VZMD actions with the larger banks in Slovenia. And it parallels a situation we saw in Spain, where banks had, so to speak, a stress test that was imposed internationally. In Spain, the national government approved it, the national bank approved it, the auditors approved it. All the people approved, saying the tests were done properly. We go to Slovenia and say the same thing. Oh, the tests were all done properly. 2 years later, the data is showing that the tests were not done properly. And what's the effect of that? In both situations, banks had issuances. Investors, individual people, invested in these banks. Many people put in their life savings in these banks for a good return. And 2 years later, find out that the data was not accurate, fraudulent, perhaps. And did the government agency catch that? Did the auditors catch that? So there's a greater need for oversight, and there's a greater need for independent entities like the World Federation or the organization in Slovenia to step forward. And that may not be popular. And it takes a great deal of resolution and I think sometimes financial capacity to take those steps. But somebody has to. Somebody has to speak for the individual investor. And if you can't rely on your bank, if you can't rely on the national bank, who do you rely on? So that's a big question then.
Some participants have already heard about these alarming actions and VZMD efforts. Since Mr. Verbic exposed the problems and VZMD endeavors in detail in May this year at the annual conference of the International Financial Litigation Network in New York, and in February and April at the conferences of the European Federation of Financial Services Users at the European Parliament and in Madrid. At the end of this international tour, VZMD President presented these acute problems again at the conference Better Finance in Brussels, where he arrived from Vienna. As a board member of the European Federation of Financial Services Users, Mr. Verbic in Brussels attended the presentation of the report Private Pensions, the Real Returns. Additional to the annual meeting and conference, representatives of investors also attended a tour of Austria's Post-AG Distribution Center, presentation of its investment potential, business activities, and a tour around its facilities. As usual, suitable presentations of companies, institutions, and investment projects included in the two VZMD business investment programs, Investo.si and Invest2.net, were also provided this time during all occasions, events, and conferences. After this year's successful presentations in Belgrade, Bled, Bratislava, Brussels, Buenos Aires, Grodno, Copenhagen, Madrid, Montevideo, New York, New Delhi, Ouagadougou, Paris, Reykjavik, Yaroslavl, and Tehran, and last year's in Astana, Almaty, Bled, Baku, Brussels, Buffalo, Bucharest, Cape Town, Celje, Dubai, Vienna, Kiev, Ljubljana, Madrid, Minsk, Moscow, New Delhi, Tokyo, Toronto, and Zagreb. The two VZMD International Business Investment Programs continue to provide for their partners effective presence and presentations on 5 continents. If you would like to take part in our events and activities, you are kindly invited to contact the VZMD Investo.si Program Coordinator by phone +386 31 770 771 or email info@investo.si.